Hi, Julian.
Hey there, Michael. How are you?
I'm very good indeed. Very good indeed. In fact, I'm quite buoyant. Buoyant by the news that I think I've got the hang of this podcast malarkey.
Time will tell. Time will tell.
It's our fourth episode. Now over 190 downloads on all reputable podcasters. So I think, Julian, this is going to be a good one. So what are we going to cover today?
I think we're going to talk about Las Vegas, the holiday of Juneteenth, and soccer in the USA.
I think you mean football in the USA, Julian, but we can return to that towards the end of the podcast. Las Vegas. Been there twice, Julian. In fact, one of my claim to fame says I was there when it snowed.
Oh, wow. That is a very unusual thing to happen while you were there. Which month was that in?
That's a very good question. Springtime, I think. May time.
That is a very unusual thing because it's a pretty hot place for most of the year, and that's, of course, part of its attraction.
Okay. So, give me a few words on Las Vegas. Do you enjoy going there, first and foremost?
No, not at all. I've been there about half a dozen times, and the first 3 times I went there, I left early. It has some pretty bad memories for me. I was married there, and my wife, who was also married there, doesn't like it at all either. It's a unique city, really unlike any in the world, and certainly any within the US. It means the meadows, but it's really far from being the meadows these days. It was built in the Great Depression. They constructed the Boulder Dam in the 1930s as part of the New Deal, and many of the sort of organized crime syndicates came into the city, and they catered for all of the workers that were working on the dam. So they offered gambling, alcohol, prostitution, and all of these things are still very much on offer in Vegas and Nevada to this day. Originally, it was built around downtown Fremont Street, but increasingly, most of the city is, or at least the tourist parts of the city, are based around a road called South Las Vegas Boulevard, or the Strip. And this strip has 11 of the 15 largest hotels in the world on the same road. And actually, the strip is not in the city of Las Vegas. It's in a separate part for kind of tax reasons. When you were in Vegas, Michael, do you remember which hotel you were staying at?
I do very well. I mean, I also had to point out to you, doing my research for today, Las Vegas has got more 5-star hotels than any other city in the world. And we stayed at the Bellagio. And
did you?
You know what I'm going to say? Why did we stay there? The fountains and Celine Dion. There's so many times you can hear that song. What is it? My song will go on. Well, it does as the fountains play.
Right. I was negative about Las Vegas, but there are many good things about it, and the quality of the hotels is one of them. There are very large numbers of really nice hotels along one road. These hotels are huge. And actually, if you're thinking about walking between the hotels, it's quite a long trek between each hotel. They look close because they're so large, but it could easily take you 30 minutes to walk between one hotel and the next adjacent hotel. We've been there half a dozen times. I've stayed in lots of different hotels. When we first went there, we were poor, and we got a room at the Excalibur Hotel, which is a hotel based on King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And we got our hotel room, I think, for 5-star hotel, beautiful pool, great amenities, and I think it was $20 a night. This was when $20 was worth a bit more, but at the time, that $20 would be the smallest amount you could pay for any hotel or motel anywhere in the US. That was great value. And each of these hotels has something to try and attract people to their hotel and to their casino. They have volcanoes that erupt. They've got gondola rides. They've got amusement rides. They've got pirate ships battling. In the Bellagio, they've got fountains blaring out Celine Dion songs. Each of them has got their own thing, which is trying to attract people from other hotels and attract them into their casino rather than their home hotel casino.
And would it be fair to say, Julian, that it's also an attempt to stop Americans going to Europe? because you can see, I know the pyramids aren't in Europe, but just go with me for a second. You can see pyramids, you can see Eiffel Tower, you can see Rome. As you've already said, you can see the gondolas of Venice. So this sort of, Las Vegas brings Europe to you in the States.
Yeah, I think they're getting their ideas for their hotels from other places that they think are marvellous around the world. The hotel for the pyramids is Luxor, and it's this huge pyramid with these lights which come out of the top of the apex of the pyramid. Paris, which is with a model of the Eiffel Tower at the front. The Venetian with all of their lagoons and the gondola rides that you can take. You can go to Café Florian in the Venetian. New York, you see the skyline of New York. Caesar's Palace, which did you once stay at Caesar's Palace? Or
No, we're very loyal to the Bellagio because of the fountains, of course.
Caesar's Palace, which takes you back to ancient Rome. The hotels are fantastic. Some of the attractions are interesting. The food has changed over the years. When I first started going there, the food was very much built around the cheap buffets that they had. And these cheap buffets would attract people to go to another hotel and hence their casino. For $5 or so, you could eat anything that you wanted. And then afterwards, you could then blow $200 at the casino. But these days, of course, the food has moved up a notch. There are a number of really high-end, high-class restaurants in Vegas. And many of the top-name chefs have restaurants attached to the big hotels on the Strip. And I think the best thing in Vegas, to my mind, is the entertainment. Historically, there have always been a number of magnificent magicians. I remember, on our honeymoon, we saw Siegfried and Roy. Laura and I had a seat at the front row of the stage, and there was an elephant on the stage, no more than a few feet from us, and they made this elephant disappear. It was, really quite a magnificent show. So they have a number of the top magicians there. They have a wide range of fantastic shows, many of them performed by the group Cirque du Soleil. So I've seen Love, which is based on the Beatles' music, quite a few times. You've got another one based on Michael Jackson's music, and a whole range of experiential shows. Then you've got sports. So we now have the Oakland Raiders have been relocated to Vegas. So you can see NFL football on the Strip. You can see hockey. Many of the large boxing matches, of course, are held on the Strip. And then finally and best, I think you have then all of the singers who have residences there. So the likes of Rod and Elton and Lady Gaga and Celine Dion, and in the past, Elvis and Sinatra, they all had long-term homes there, and they would play 100 nights in a row or whatever. It's a fantastic deal for them. They get these huge crowds, but they don't have to move city every day or so. They have the people coming to them. So have you been to any of these shows, Michael?
Well, I was going to say, if anyone listening is planning to go, it's well worth checking out in advance. So getting seats when they're in residence is quite difficult. So, for example, I tried to get to see Elton John and didn't. But what I did see at the Hard Rock was Santana. And Santana were excellent, including footage of them playing at Woodstock. Not many artists today still play who were at Woodstock.
No. Well, most of them died of drug overdoses in the 1970s, I suspect. So yes, that is good advice. These shows, which truly are very good, don't get to put on a show at Vegas unless it's really top-notch. Make sure that you book those in advance so you're not missing out on the best that Vegas has to offer.
And we also saw a tribute to the Rat Pack when we was out there, which again was very professionally done. So you're right, lots of shows. 2 out-of-town experiences, Julian, for you to consider. You made reference to Boulder City, which is not really a city in my view. It's a small place, but definitely worth going to see the Hoover Dam and the workings of it. And my personal favourite, and I'm going to give a plug for Maverick Helicopters, is to get a helicopter ride out to the Grand Canyon. Do it at sunset. Very cleverly, you can see the sunset twice as it goes up and down. But on the way back, you go down the Strip and see all the neon lights. Very impressive. Well worth the spend.
Yeah, we didn't do that, but we did the small aeroplane over the Grand Canyon. And that was, at least for me, I enjoyed the experience. My wife was sort of cowering in the seat next to me, but...
was that before or after the wedding?
Actually, I think that was on a subsequent visit. It was many years after we'd been married. And I would say the best thing about Vegas is that it is in the middle of lots of other stuff, which is really much more worth visiting. So if you look at all of the parks that are nearby, so Bryce Canyon, Capitol Reef, Zion, Monument Valley, Canyonlands, those sort of fantastic canyons in Nevada, Arizona, and Utah. Those truly are fantastic things to see.
So, shall we finish with a rating? Vegas, how many stars are you going to give it?
Well, first of all, before we do Vegas, I would say, if you're going to spend 2 or 3 days there and you're just going to live a hedonistic existence for a few days and you're going to splurge out on a couple of shows and you're not going to go in July and August when it is just too hot, I would say it's probably a must-go location. So I'd say it's 5 stars. If you're talking about being there for a week or something, I would say it's a 1 star. Just too noisy, there's very low exclusivity in Vegas. You can go to every hotel. Every American who can afford the airfare there is going to be where you are. So it's not an exclusive place. Every hotel forces you to walk through the casino. So it's a very noisy type of thing. I can't personally take more than 2 or 3 days of it. But if you're going for 2 or 3 days and then you're going to these other places, then to me it's a must-go place. And you?
No, I was going to say, well, if you haven't been there, absolutely, it's one of these places you should visit. It's not quite know wherever you've been, but it is very different. On the other hand, I think once you've been once, maybe you don't want to go a second or a third time. Unless you like gambling, whatever.
Or 6 in my case.
Yeah, 6. That's Vegas. So 5 stars from Julian if you're going for a short period of time.
And 5 stars from you?
Yeah, if it's your first visit. So, Julian, I see a new holiday's been announced. Juneteenth. Why on earth have they called it Juneteenth? Why not Freedom Day or Emancipation Day? Give me the background, Julian.
Juneteenth is a combination of June and 19th, hence Juneteenth. On June the 19th, 1865, where a Union general rode into Galveston, Texas, and announced to the people there from henceforth that all of the slaves would be, or were at that point, free. And it is something which the black community, the African American community, have celebrated for many years. There are other dates that could have been celebrated. They could have celebrated the 1st of January 1863, when Lincoln announced the Emancipation Declaration. They could have celebrated December the 6th, 1865, which was when the 13th Amendment was ratified. But they've chosen to celebrate this day when a Union general rode into town, into Galveston. It's the 12th federal holiday. And a federal holiday basically means that federal employees, so employees of the central government, get a day off. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's a public holiday for the rest of the US. And last week, what happened, very last minute, because obviously June the 19th, I think, was Saturday last week. So on the Thursday, they took it through a series of votes. So the House of Representatives voted with a very large majority in favour of this new holiday. The Senate voted 100-0 in favour of the holiday, and it was then signed by the President. And then, very hurriedly, federal employees were given the day off the next day, which was the 18th, because that was the Juneteenth this year fell on a Saturday. So the very next day, everyone had a sudden extra day's holiday. It wasn't necessarily new to everyone. So in addition to federal holidays, the states also give some holidays for their employees. And there were 4 states which had already given their state employees the holiday of Juneteenth. That's Texas, New York, Virginia, and Washington state. Those people were planning to have that day off anyway because it was a state holiday. That's the background. What questions have you got, Michael?
Well, my research said the actual slavery was abolished on the 18th of December, 1865. So I was going to say, why don't we do it all December? Or is it so close to Christmas they decided not to pick that date? But I think you've covered that in your preamble. So my second question was, seeing it's a federal holiday, so am I right in thinking federal employees not only get the holiday, but they get paid? If you're not working for the government and your employer gives you the holiday, do you typically get it paid or is it unpaid?
It's up to individual companies to decide which holidays they give. So there are 12 federal holidays, and most companies will give about 8 of them to their employees. But each company will decide on different holidays. So there are some holidays which more or less every company gives, or at least 90%. So those would be New Year's Day, Memorial Day, Independence Day, Labor Day, and Thanksgiving, and Christmas Day. So pretty much most companies will give those as holidays to their employees. And then there are a bunch of other federal holidays which only some will give. So Martin Luther King Day, which is the 17th of January, about 40% of companies give that day off to their employees. That was the last new holiday which was announced by the federal government. 4 out of every 10 people will have that as a public holiday. And that, I think, is what's likely to happen to Juneteenth. I mean, obviously, there will be a number of companies which will like the idea of showing that they are sensitive to African American issues and giving that holiday, but it will take quite a bit of time for Juneteenth to become a normal holiday for most people who work in private companies. And there's a bunch of these federal holidays which are given to very few people. So Columbus Day, Veterans Day, those 2 holidays, there's fewer than 1 in 5, maybe 1 in 10 people who have that as a holiday if you work in the private sector. So the challenge for Juneteenth is how do they spread that holiday so it's a holiday for most Americans, not just federal employees.
And am I right in thinking, Julian, actually annual leave, or the total number of annual leave in the States, is significantly less than the UK? So whereas a UK employee would get probably 20, 25 days plus the 10 federal days or bank holidays in the UK, I believe that's not the case in the States. Is that true?
Yeah, it's quite complicated, but yeah, that is basically true. So federal employees, they now get 44 paid days off, which is much, much higher than most people who are employed in private companies. It varies a lot, but typically people in their first year of employment would get very little vacation, maybe even 0 vacation in their first year of employment. And after that, they might get, let's say, 10 days. It would increase as you were in employment for long with that company. And the really shocking figure is that half of Americans don't take their full allotment of vacation. I think they take about half of the vacation that they're allotted. But there are companies which give a lot of vacation. It just varies according to the type of company and the culture they want to create. I would say the average number of holidays is between 10 and 15, plus your public holidays.
And returning to Juneteenth as a holiday, as an employee, if I was working for an organisation that didn't grant me that day, can you lobby to get that?
It's so new that it's a bit difficult to say. I mean, certainly a couple of very prominent companies have announced that they're giving this holiday to their employees. JP Morgan, I think, was one of the ones which announced that it was going to give this holiday to their employees. Someone was telling me that Accenture had just announced that they were giving Martin Luther King as a public holiday from 2022. Whether they'll also give Juneteenth is a question for the management of Accenture. I'm sure there will be people who say, we should have this as a holiday for everyone. But that was also the case for Martin Luther King Day, which is also has very good reasons why that should be a holiday. I would have thought there must be a point where companies say, well, hold on a second, these holidays are getting a bit out of hand. So if we give Juneteenth, let's take away one of the other public holidays. So let's not celebrate Columbus Day or President's Day or, one of the other sort of lesser used holidays.
Okay.
I did speak to a couple of people, just came up in conversations, a couple of Americans about this, and they were not very positive about despite the huge majorities in the House of Representatives and the Senate, they weren't very positive about this holiday. They pointed out that the cost of federal employees was around about $1 billion for adding this new holiday, which to my mind is small beer compared to the amount of money that they're borrowing for COVID and infrastructure bills. But they were concerned about the cost. Many people's views of federal employees is that service you get from federal employees is quite low. This is yet another reason for even less service than you got before. So there are some people who are none too pleased about this new federal holiday.
But interesting given the rarity of the major political forces agreeing that this holiday should be created, and then a certain amount of apathy, I think you're saying, of those who think it's a good or bad idea.
Well, I only spoke to a couple of people, to be honest. I wouldn't say that it was a representative sample size to know what most people think about it. I did read something from last year, because this campaign to get Juneteenth as a federal holiday has been going for some time. Something written last year by a very reputable magazine was suggesting it was going to take a very long time indeed to get the approval for this holiday. Well, here we are a year later and it's been almost unanimously approved. There's a debate and dialogue going on in America at the moment, which means that asking for a holiday celebrating the emancipation of African Americans is going to be received quite positively at this point in time.
In evidence where there is agreement, you can make progress quickly.
Right, that's right. Yeah, rather than trying to push when everyone's disagreeing, if you wait a little bit, sometimes you find that it's just really easy to do something. Sometimes being in the right time at the right place means that you can do things easily. New holiday of Juneteenth. A friend of mine is a judge, and he was saying they were scrabbling around about whether to give this as a holiday, just a day to really think about it. Next year, it'll be a lot more planned.
So, Julian, as you know, in Europe at the moment, there's a little bit of a football competition going on, or should I say a soccer competition going on between all the European nations. As I speak, England have progressed to the round of last 16, where we're due to meet the might of Germany, so I suspect our participation in this tournament may end relatively swiftly. But I thought we should talk about soccer. And my first thing around soccer, why do you call it soccer and not football, since you know it is football and not NFL football?
Well, I know it's football and I call it football, and I have to correct myself in front of Americans and call it soccer because football is reserved for the NFL and college forms of the American football game. But as I understand it, soccer is an English term. It comes from association football, and it's conflating association into soccer. And it was one of the names which was originally used to refer to the sport. It's not a name which is used in Britain anymore to talk about football. So I don't think it really is that important what the game is called. The good news is, unlike the 1970s when there was a major soccer league in the US, is that nowadays soccer plays to pretty much the same rules as is played everywhere else in the world. Have you watched a soccer game in the US, Michael?
Not live, but obviously on the TV. And indeed, as part of my research, I had a look at the MLS league tables. And the first thing that struck me when I looked at both the table and the teams is it would appear there are very few Europeans or sort of declining British pros playing in the MLS. Am I right? Whereas one stage, you would go through a team and you would recognise these players who were going for their final payday in their end of career. Am I correct in that assumption, Julian, do you think?
Yes, I think so. How you put together your team is quite different in the US to, say, the average country in Europe. So what they have there is they have a salary cap for each team. And they have a total cap that the team can spend on players' salaries. And they say that can be no more than $5.2 million. And then for each player, there's a minimum that you can play each player, which is $50,000. And then there's a maximum, which is $651,000. And then there's an exception to that called designated players, or what they call the Beckham rule. And that means that you can have up to 3 people in your team whose salaries don't count towards the salary cap. Well, they count up to the maximum, 651. But if you pay them $5,651,000, only 651,000 counts towards your cap. So you can have up to 3 players who are not subject to those rules. And those typically are the players who are, usually they're in their sort of declining years and they go to America for their sort of final payday. So that's the reason that you don't see a lot of British players, or indeed any other players there, because each team is restricted to just 3, what I would say are very good players. But it does make the teams a little bit skewed. So my team, which is Atlanta United, they have 3 very good players who are designated players, Martinez, Barco and Franco. And they used to have Miguel Almiron, who I think now plies his trade at Newcastle United. Have you seen him at all, Michael?
No, I haven't, no.
He's an okay player.
Yes, I have seen him. Yes, yes, I do. In fact, he played a lot of games without scoring for a long time, isn't he?
He did, yeah.
Is he like, is he Ecuadorian or Peruvian?
I think he's Paraguayan.
Yeah.
And I don't know that for certain. He's most of the players in the MLS seem to hail from South America, Central America. And he's an okay player and an okay side in the Premier League. He's certainly not out of his depth there.
No.
He was a very good player in MLS. Every side has 3 very good players, assuming they're all fit. And then they've got 8 plus substitutes who are, really quite a bit less good. And then you have some aging pros as well. So Bradley Guzan, do you remember him from his Aston Villa days? He's the goalkeeper.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
37 now. He's a pretty good keeper still. He plays for Atlanta United. Yeah, so the standard of MLS is around about the sort of lower championship standard. So round about the standard of your beloved Derby County.
Which I'm glad you've raised, because there were 2 connections to the LMS from Derby County. The first one is that Johnny Russell, who plays for Sporting Kansas City, second place currently is that in the Eastern Conference, is an ex-Derby County player. I don't think he got picked for the Scottish squad, maybe because he was playing in the States, but I understand he's seen as one of the better players in the league. And the second one is even slightly more, not tenuous, that Alan Hinton, who was a key player in Derby's Premiership or Championship winning side back in the 70s, played for the Seattle Sounders, who are currently top of the league. And Alan Hinton, plug, has got a book out at the moment. But again, one of their famous players. What I wanted to ask you about, though, Julie, was a team immediately below Atlanta United, Inter Miami. Okay?
Yes.
So just tell me, because they don't seem to be doing that well looking at the MP, which presumes stands matches played as opposed to played, as we would say in the UK. But give me a sense on them.
Well, I haven't seen them because I've been busy. I've been travelling around. I'm going to be talking from a bigger position of ignorance than normal. So when David Beckham came over to the US, not only was he paid a huge amount of money, but it was also promised that he could be the owner of a new franchise once he had retired from football. Usually you've got to pay a lot of money for a new franchise, and he was given a new franchise for peanuts. So he was able to set up his own team, which he set up in Miami, because Miami didn't have a side of their own. This is their first season in football. They have Phil Neville, I don't know if you remember him, who is their manager. And they have had, I think, some issues with designated players. For some reason, maybe it's that Phil Neville's not very good at math, but they seem to have more than 3 designated players. But I don't know the full extent of that story. I just sort of caught that as some issue which is running around in MLS. But I think they've had a bad start. And I can't tell you who's playing for them, who their designated players are. But they've had a bad start in the new league, which I guess you would expect that new side coming together for the first time might struggle against sides that have been playing together for, a much longer period.
What I was going to ask you though, Julian, Beckham got a lot of press in the UK, but of course, I suppose the interesting thing in terms of Inter Miami is the Hispanic population, and therefore they do have a core fan base or people who like football. So overall, what's attendances like? Because again, am I not right in thinking that soccer is a very popular playing sport, i.e. most school children, most grads playing it, but the attendances, what would be an average league attendance for the...
I think the average is about 25 to 30,000 attendance. My team, Atlanta United, obviously we've had COVID, which has restricted things a little bit, but they would often get 70,000 plus at their stadium. It really is a terrific experience going to see some of these MLS teams. So Atlanta United, this very, very large crowd, which is very passionate and pretty knowledgeable about their team. And Atlanta United, I think, formed about 4 years ago. They set up a number of competing supporters groups before the team had played a single game. They got these supporters groups very involved on many things around the match. Atlanta United, they developed these traditions before they played a single game. So they had this very large stake at the front of the stadium, and you would go to that stake at the beginning of the game, and you would sign the stake, and you would give your good wishes to the players. And then at the beginning of the game, or just before the game started, these supporters clubs would carry over the shoulders this really very large stake into the stadium, and then some celebrity, most of whom I hadn't heard of, but they were probably youth celebrities, would come into the stadium, and with a big mallet they would push the stake into the ground behind the goal. They have these supporters clubs who make an enormous amount of noise, and they had all the chants ready. It's a really very good experience. And, 70,000 plus attendance. Some weeks that makes them the second or third, or most weeks that makes them the second or third most attended football game on the planet. And they're going to see a side which is round about Derby County standard. The owner of Atlanta United is a guy called Arthur Blank, who's one of the founders of the kind of the B&Q equivalent in the States, Home Depot. He also owns the NFL football side. And so he has built this fantastic stadium for both soccer and for American football. It's not a football stadium, both football and soccer. It's equally good for both sports. He's put a lot of investment into his home city of Atlanta and into soccer. But there are many other sides within MLS. Seattle, Portland, some of these teams people are very passionate about the game. As you said earlier on in your question, there are a lot of people who play the game. 17 million play it every week. And there's a lot of women who play the game. In terms of support, it's already in the top 3 in terms of watching the sport, after football and basketball. It's not really yet quite considered a top 4 sport in the US, but really is only a question of time, in my view, before it completely takes over hockey and baseball. And presumably, what will happen over time is that the standard of soccer will improve and the standard of the American team will improve, and it is just a question of time before the USA do win the World Cup. Maybe my lifetime. Perhaps not yours, but probably mine.
You've cheated, Julian, because I was going to say, I was going to finish them with, so when do you think America will win the World Cup? Obviously we've got Qatar next year.
They're very unlikely to win in the short term. The very best athletes still go into other sports. And so I think it's not until you get your country's best athletes going into soccer that you will see a USA really being able to compete on the World Cup stage. And at the moment, there's a lot more money to be made in football, basketball, and even baseball. I think it will take some years to change that. But, for the women's game, and you have to remember, we've been really talking about the men's game. The women's game, the US are completely dominant. They've won 4 recent World Cups, 4 recent Olympics. The women's game goes from strength to strength. Maybe not in terms of support, but in terms of ability and standards, the women's is the best in the world.
That is why I was going to be slightly more optimistic than you. I think you will see it within the next 20 years. And why? Because you've got the bedrock of lots of people playing the sport. All you need to do is put in place the infrastructure of how you grow that talent. Whereas, interestingly, in Europe, most people would say they've got the infrastructure, they don't have the bedrock of talent. Hence the fact they recruit all these, Africans or Asians to come into the game who they've identified as talent. So I think the women's game in America, as you say, is the elite game of women's football. So I could easily see the States winning the World Cup in the next 20 years. Once business gets hold of it and sees it equates to, say, TV revenues, then I think you'll see a dramatic change to a higher standard. And albeit how high Derby County are, they'll be significantly better than Derby County.
I'm certain that they will improve and that eventually the standard will get much nearer to the Premiership. Certainly it's ubiquitous on TV. So every Premier game, every La Liga game, every Bundesliga game, every MLS game, every Euro game, every Champions League, every international, all of those are covered live on the networks here. They're able to buy these things at a relatively low price at the moment. Clearly, if you like soccer, you can watch it easily in the US.
So you stole my question around sort of when they're going to win the World Cup. So let's finish on who's going to win the Euros. Who's your tip?
Well, I'm an England supporter, and I think that I was looking at the, who's in England's half of the draw. I would feel pretty confident about England getting to the final if they weren't playing Germany next. But, Germany have looked pretty ordinary. I think that side of the draw is a little easier. But you'd be a fool, if you've been alive as long as we have, Michael, you'd be a fool to say that England would win a major tournament. I'm going to go for Belgium winning, but my heart, wants England to win. And I think they've got a draw where they could get to the final if they get past this next stage.
I think to get to the final would be a major achievement, but I'm going for Italy. On that point, Julian, let's close. We really do appreciate the reviews you give us. So please go on to your favourite podcaster and write us a review. We are now at all good podcasters, and that includes Google. And we'll see you soon. Thank you for listening.